Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video. We have all heard the phrase that money doesn't change you, it makes you more of who you are. And this is especially true in the latest case of Shannon Sharpe and his most recent lawsuit with a woman named Gabriella Zuniga. First, I want to talk about the fact that one of the mistakes that many people make, especially if they didn't come from money, is they believe that money makes them immune to everything. Unfortunately, the reality is that when you have more money, you become a target. When men reach billionaire status, their wealth doesn't protect them like many of them think. It makes them targets. We've seen time and time again that men who do not evolve socially and sexually with their money get into trouble. They end up in courtrooms, not in boardrooms, not in high places. They end up in a lot of trouble. They end up, unfortunately, kind of like how Shannon Sharpe is. Now, let's talk about something that might be a little uncomfortable for us to talk about, and that is that this has probably been happening for a long time. He was very comfortable to speak to her in that way, and let's be honest, the way that if you guys saw the text messages, I don't want to put them up, they're very vulgar. The way that they spoke to each other just gave me the sense that this is kind of how he's been communicating with women for a long time. And so what that means is that as a sort of regular football player, or maybe even just a TV personality, his name wasn't that big. He wasn't really that much of a celebrity until Club Shay Shay took off. He's on First Take. He's got his podcast. So up until now, he hasn't really been this prominent figure. So no one's really checking for him, so to speak. Then we had the recent slip up he had on Instagram, where he was on Instagram Live, and apparently he was engaging in sexual behavior on live. Now, to me, that signified something very important. That let me know that he doesn't quite have the tact, the dignity, the attention to detail that is required to make sure that his behavior is kept out of the limelight. And this is what I mean by not evolving socially and sexually. There's no way that a man with this much money should make a mistake like putting his sexual encounters on Instagram. And I think that's why a lot of people thought that it was fake and that it was staged, because they were thinking the way that I am, which is if you have that much money, you need to start protecting yourself. But as I just stated earlier, a lot of men who did not come from money, when they get wealthy, they think their money is going to protect them. Shannon Sharpe thought he was untouchable. In a lot of ways, he was behaving that way, especially after this encounter was filmed live online. And he lost a few endorsements, but he actually blew up. In fact, he actually gained more notoriety. The problem is that he didn't gain the kind of fame that reaches across all genres and socioeconomic classes. And that's something that people don't really want to talk about, because we have to take a look at ourselves. I'm going to take a little aside here and talk about the fact that there's hood rich. Can we talk about it? And then there's actual wealth. And I hate to say this, but Shannon Sharpe became hood rich, meaning he didn't really change his behaviors. He didn't really move up in his behaviors class wise. He just had more money. And there comes a point where, no matter how much money you have, if you don't know how to engage with certain types of people and you don't know how to conduct yourself in a way that, yes, appeals to the larger wealthy community, you will ruin your chances at life. Prior to this latest lawsuit with Gabriella Zuniga, where she claims that he actually R''ed her, he was in talks to make a $100 million deal for his podcast. Can we take a guess at which kind of people were interested in his podcast? Are they the kind of people that would be okay with, him going on live and, exposing some of his sexual behaviors? Are they the kind of people that would think that the way that he's speaking to this woman is appropriate? No, they're not. And this is where maturing with your money is really, really important. I want to talk about the fact when I saw sort of Shannon Sharpe losing it, okay? This is going to offend some people because they love him to death. But when he started bringing his black and milds and his whiskey to Undisputed with, what's that man's name, you guys? Skip? I was like, okay, he's not ready to let go of the persona. He sort of built this brand as this sort of like hood uncle, down south uncle, black and mild, drinking Henny. And I started to wonder, is this really who you want to be? Do you want to be someone who's respected? Because that behavior is not respectable behavior. Or do you want to be someone who just appeals to a certain demographic? And that's a real question that we all have to ask ourselves. Sometimes, when I'm doing my business planning and I'm meeting with my business coach, they often ask me who's my demographic. And a lot of the times, my business coach will ask me, okay, how do we reach the largest amount of people? Because in business, it is wise to have, yes, you can have a business that targets this group of people, but you can also have a business that targets another subset of people. And Shannon Sharpe was starting to dip his toes in the broader community. Let's just be frank. His podcast appeals to Black people, people from the South, maybe people of a lower socioeconomic status. And I know people don't want to hear me say that, but that sort of behavior, that sort of black and mild Hennessy drinking uncle is of that demographic. And at some point, with the kind of money that he was making, he was going to have to make a switch. And that's really hard for people. I will admit that, when I started making more money, it was like, oh my gosh, you're dressing differently, you're acting differently. Yeah, I work with a different population of people, so I have to engage in a way that relates to those people. You should change, you should evolve. And so I fear what has happened with Shannon Sharpe is that he did not want to evolve. Now, let's talk about how his money has made him even more of a public figure and the scrutiny that comes along with that. Once a man becomes a public figure, every single interaction is magnified. Gabriela Zuniga may have consented to some behaviors with him, and she may have not. But it doesn't matter. The behaviors where she felt like she did not consent, because he's a public figure, left him up to public scrutiny. And oftentimes we see promiscuous behavior as harmless, and really we think of it as anonymous, especially when you can call, people don't really know where you live, you can call them up. Shannon Sharpe lives this lifestyle. But this sort of promiscuity and this sort of behavior, as we have seen, can destroy brand partnerships and investor trust and personal legacy when it's exposed in the spotlight. And I would argue, even though Shannon Sharpe wouldn't, I would argue that his "That's My Michelle" moment did ruin his legacy. I will tell you personally, I thought, it was sloppy. It was sloppy. And I think he got too big for his britches in this situation as well. Emotional immaturity doesn't really age well. Many wealthy men fail to mature emotionally, especially as their net worth grows, because you can just buy whatever you need. You don't have to work on yourself. No one's telling you no. No one's telling you the truth oftentimes. And this sexual impulsivity that often comes with like being a football player and youth is actually quite destructive in adulthood. And that takes a certain level of maturity to tone that down. But when you have money, when you're being praised for that behavior, it kind of makes it hard for you to change. And that's what we saw with Shannon Sharpe. He doesn't have the emotional discipline that he portrays. And you have to have emotional discipline when you're growing financially. That's just a fact, because your emotions dictate quite a bit of what you do, which is not just like your money habits, but how you engage with other people. And if you get comfortable because you think you have enough money to sort of buy your way into things, or you forget that you too are human, we run into a problem. Now, billionaire status often demands a new standard of conduct, but people don't realize that. And I think I always blame social media, but you guys, it's really true. It's one thing to earn your money slowly over time, and your family tells you how to, this is how we spend our money, and you are sort of groomed into wealth status. But because we have so many ways for people to make money, and I'm not even saying that Shannon Sharpe is a billionaire, he's definitely a multimillionaire, but even that level of income used to come with training, inherent training from your family, from, other businessmen. They would share with you how to conduct yourself. But a lot of people are coming into money as first generation millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires, and they don't realize that it actually demands a different kind of conduct. Men, when they get money, have to refine how they relate to women and power and sex and integrity, discernment. All of that stuff is essential, not just for legal protection, but really for your peace of mind. I know Shannon Sharpe right now is literally having a hard time sleeping. I know that he is, because here's what people don't really want to talk about. The way that he spoke to her, even let's just pretend that he has these allegations are completely false. Even the way that he spoke to her was messy. Even the way that he spoke to her was disrespectful. It was degrading. And so it doesn't really matter that, yes, the lawsuit could get dismissed and everyone, but at the bottom line is that people are going to hear and remember the words that he spoke. And then they're going to say, oh, and then he had that moment with Skip, and oh, and then he had that Michelle moment. So things are starting to stack up against Shannon Sharpe because he hasn't matured emotionally. Now, of course, I always hope the best for these people. I want them to do well. If he has engaged in illegal, forceful behavior, he needs to be punished for it. But if he hasn't, this is a wake up call to him and many other men. All right, you guys, I just wanted to share my thoughts really quickly with this. Promiscuity has a price, and it has a price for men and women. Oftentimes we think about promiscuity as like, oh, women and their looseness, but it's like, honestly, men are also being, they're encouraged to be promiscuous, and a lot of times they're not encouraged to watch how they behave around women as they build wealth. And so we see a lot of men falling into this trap where they never learn how to treat women properly. And so the more money that they get, the more abusive, I don't want to say that on YouTube, abusive that they become. So promiscuity does have a price. It may have a price in terms of, just ruining your self-esteem. It may have a price in terms of, someone trying to catch you up into a lawsuit. It has a price in terms of, maybe having an unwanted child or diseases. And so we have to stop pretending like this is not a real thing that happens. And I'm listening to all of these men talk about this case, and it's just excuse after excuse after excuse. But if this were reversed, they would say, why is she being a 304? She's being too. And men can be promiscuous too, and it's just as dangerous, it's just as wrong, and it's just as foul. And so let's just all work on exercising a little bit of sexual discipline. That's a skill that actually makes someone, to me, makes someone a healthy person when they can demonstrate sexual discipline. All right, you guys, thanks for listening to this video. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.